Majora's Mask was a game that focused more on the side quests and character interaction than it did on dungeon gameplay.
And although that resulted in the game only having 4 dungeons, each dungeon had its own unique look and feel and also took advantage of the mask you got in that section.
Now in this dungeon ranking, we won't be cluing the moon because we just feel like it didn't follow the regular structure of a Zelda dungeon.
And now, without further ado, we are 2 guys playing Zelda, and this is our Majora's Mask dungeon ranking. Number 4 on our list is the Woodfall Temple, and even though it is in 4th place, there are actually a lot of things about this dungeon we really enjoy.
I liked it very much, actually. I kind of like this whole swamp feel to it. Like,
yes.
It's really the first time we got this in a Zelda game. Now, we had the Swamp Palace in Link to the Past, but it didn't have this kind of feeling. You know, it's basically like a water dungeon, whereas this feels like, you know, you had the poisonous water. Yes. It actually feels like a swamp.
And I was a big fan of that poisonous water because this is a pretty dark dungeon in general. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the pinkish, purplish swamp water actually added some color to it and brightened it up a little bit.
I like how the game's color is kind of like, you know, the purple color, and then you kind of see it right off the bat in the first dungeon.
And honestly, some of the flying or coasting, whatever you call.
No, I call it the helicopter, but
yeah, honestly, some of those puzzles are pretty fun. I like the soaring. I like being able to skip across the water, and I think it's very well implemented into this dungeon.
I was actually a big fan of the theme of this dungeon also. Like, before we got into this dungeon, we kind of had the whole DQ Palace and stuff, and it kind of has a different theme, but very similar to that, like the whole, I guess, swamp feel you could say to the theme.
It really did. It really did. Now, a few things definitely contributed to dropping this dungeon down to 4th for us. I was not a big fan of Deku Link.
No, I wasn't either. It's probably my least favorite transformation, really, in the whole game.
I agree. He was just the weakest. I mean, he flew and blew bubbles.
And that's what I didn't like about him. The weakest. He's the weakest.
We're men and we don't like things.
We like Goron.
and it kind
of smallest too. Weakest and smallest going on that.
Exactly. And another bit of a downer was this first boss.
He was hard. I really just didn't like him. Probably because he was hard. A first boss should really never be this hard.
No, plus all the swarms of enemies he launches at you.
Yeah.
Just
But I love his ritual dance. Like how he kind of jumps around, does that whole ritual.
Yeah.
That is a very cool part of
his
it.
His chants are annoying though.
Yeah, well, that's what. Well, yeah, his chants are annoying. I kind of like that.
I
was kind of saying, like, it's so ritual, like the chants and dancing, I really did like.
Let's agree to disagree on that.
Now, if you watch any of our other commentaries, you usually hear us complain quite a bit about water dungeons, but I actually do like this water dungeon. I like how you change the flow of the water.
Yeah.
And then also introduces Zora Link, and you get to use him to like kind of swim faster throughout the dungeon, and being able to swim faster and get around a dungeon or water dungeon quicker is I'm a fan of.
Beats the heck out of stomping around in the iron boots.
Yeah, yes, having to switch every time you need them.
Yeah, that was annoying. But yeah, I agree with you for the most part. I will be honest, when I first played this dungeon the first time and got so lost and turned around in the different currents of the water, I hated it.
It can get very confusing. It really can.
But going back and replaying it and having a better idea of how it works, I agree with you. It's definitely not as nightmarish as like an Ocarina of Water.
Well, there is a lot of water in it. I mean, it feels like you're a lot on hard land too. Like you obviously spend time in the water, but it doesn't feel like you spend too much time in the water.
And I like the concept of continuing to open up the flow of water throughout the dungeon, and by turning these cranks.
Anything that doesn't involve lowering and highering water levels is okay with me.
Yeah. Plus some of the like the catapults that you use the fire and ice arrows to open up this big turn wheel in the middle.
Like the fans, I really like the fans and how those change and everything.
Yeah, it's neat concepts. I mean, the flip side of that is, Zora Link can be tough to control sometimes.
Yes, he's very tough to control.
He swims so fast.
But that's also the good part of it, is that he swims so fast.
He does. But it also resulted in me banging my head on the wall many times.
And I just love the little image of the water going through the pipes too. Just like something very small that was just kind of cool.
I agree. Now,
York, whatever it is,
was not a very fun fight.
No, he's probably one of my least favorites in the whole game, really.
Yeah, and obviously there's not a lot of them.
And I think it's because he's just so ugly, to be honest with you. He is just so ugly.
He is, and I feel like he was so much easier than a few of the other bosses, too. I mean, you shoot with a bow and then go down there and shock him.
Yeah, shock him.
And life's not bad at all.
And the range is so big on that shield that, it's not very difficult at all. But
no, not at all. Just not a fun boss.
No.
Not the best dungeon.
But overall, I think but for a water dungeon, though, it was pretty good.
coming in at number 2 on our countdown is the Snowhead Temple, and there was a lot about this dungeon we loved.
Goron mask. Absolutely love the Goron mask. It made you big, it made you strong.
Oh, the rolling?
The rolling, which allowed you to go off ramps.
Oh, it was so much
the
fun.
game, which was really one of the reasons I like this dungeon so much.
Really,
and the reason why I put it above Great Bay, because when we were kind of talking about this, Great Bay and Snowhead were kind of right there.
Yep.
I think the whole ramping thing kind of made it go above it.
And I also liked that, even though of course Ocarina of Time had the ice cavern, this game introduced like a snow and ice dungeon, like a
combination, yeah. And it also kind of had, I'm pretty sure that kind of had the sound from the ice cavern
I think it had
somewhere in this theme. So yeah, it was kind of cool combining the whole snow and ice thing.
I agree. Not a huge fan of fighting Wizrobe a couple times in this
and
dungeon.
really, I mean, it was the first like kind of winter dungeon, I guess you could say we had, because we did have the ice cavern, but the ice cavern was a mini dungeon. So this is like the really first true big winter dungeon we had, and that cinematic right there, big main room is just absolutely awesome.
I just love watching that pillar rise up, and eventually, like, we actually knocked down a few chunks of it to get the platforms and ramps to line up to where we can eventually get to the boss himself.
And while I didn't like this when it was happening, one part that I really like about this dungeon is that, like, you know, messing up can really cost you a lot of time. Like,
yes,
so as far as like that main room, like, you know, missing the ramp. And you'll see later on what kind of, there's some snow on these banks that you got to roll across perfectly. And I just like that whole element of danger that was presented throughout the whole dungeon.
Because if you miss one of these jumps, you will have to redo a good chunk of the dungeon.
And just rolling. And like, especially this part, like this lead up right here, like that, you're up at the top of that whole main room, and you got that ramp right there. It's just you and that ramp.
And I like that ice, I like that ice ring around the boss door entrance too. And the goat himself is
one of my favorite bosses in the
game. Yeah, he's fun to fight, rolling around as Goron Link. It'd be a little frustrating sometimes if he gets hit, if he hits you many times, but otherwise, great dungeon.
And man, I mean, what did you think was going to be number one? You knew it was coming. Number one, Stone Tower Temple. I mean, it's one of my favorite dungeons in the whole Legend of Zelda series. And just, for anybody who's played this game, I think it always ranks up there as number one. The theme, getting to use a different mask throughout the dungeon, and just kind of the whole, it wasn't a desert dungeon, but we always liked desert dungeons. And it kind of had that similar feel to it.
And I know the main gimmick of this dungeon that stuck with me and kept it in my mind when we first started this, it was one I mentioned as one of my favorites, is flipping this dungeon upside down. And just the visual of the entire temple, or dungeon, whatever you want to call it, flipping upside down and going through
and like that
on the
face,
ceiling.
just the design of that face, like when you're going in, just looked awesome. And for me, like this whole canyon, this dungeon felt like it was farther out in terms of, like, you felt like you're kind of like in a whole different, you were in a whole different place, obviously. But just felt like it's so much farther out than the other dungeons, really.
It did, but it was,
and that view right there, sorry for interrupting, but that view come in right there and seeing the sky below you, just
that's actually exactly what I was about to say, just walking in. And here's a great visual right here of flipping the dungeon over. I mean, it's just such a great concept. That really...
a new concept at that time, and a concept that we have not seen since then.
No, not at all. And it definitely made it memorable even years and years and years.
Like I said, definitely for this game and over the whole series.
And to be quite honest, I thought some of the mini-bosses
in this
dungeon were some of my favorites as well. They were tough.
And I like that it had about... there's some that you kind of couldn't count as mini-bosses, but it had about 3 to 5 mini-bosses, depending on what you clarify as a mini-boss.
Oh, yeah, and they were... I feel like they were more varied and a lot more fun. And you didn't have to replay that stupid frog guy again.
No, yes, that's true. And I also felt like we used a lot of our items that we got throughout the whole game. Along with the mask, definitely.
Now, the boss fight wasn't necessarily that high on our list. It was a little bland for the...
I wasn't a huge fan of it, but...
No, but that definitely was not enough to detract away from the overall dungeon. And even though it was number 4 in the game, it was number 1 on our ranking.
Now here are our individual rankings. You can actually see that we had the exact same ranking for this game, which hasn't happened really up to this point yet.
No, not at all. And honestly, there wasn't that much debate about what the order was going to be. We knew coming in kind of what we thought of the dungeons.
And this was two guys playing Zelda Majora's Mask dungeon ranking.